$200. That was the price printed on the birth certificates issued by the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy in southern Louisiana from 1842 to 1856. 14 years of meticulously recorded transactions. 87 babies sold to plantation families across 3 parishes. The sisters referred to them as blessed adoptions and promised each child came from unfortunate circumstances requiring Christian charity. But when a fire consumed the convent's east wing in March 1856, the flames uncovered ledgers that told another story. Every single infant had been born inside those walls. Every mother's name was recorded in a separate book locked in the Mother Superior's office, and every one of those mothers wore a nun's habit during the day while laboring in the convent's cotton fields at night. The church buried the evidence within 48 hours, but 3 letters survived. Written by women who never learned to write their own names. Before we continue with the story of Our Lady of Sorrows Convent, ensure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell so stories like this never pass you by. And in the comments, tell us which state you're listening from. We love hearing from our community across America. What those letters would reveal challenged everything the parish believed about faith, mercy, and the women who professed to serve God. St. Augustine Parish stretched along the western bank of the Atchafalaya River in Louisiana, where moss-draped cypress trees cast shadows across water the color of weak tea. In 1840, the parish contained 11 sugar plantations, 23 slave quarters, 2 cotton gins, and exactly 1 Catholic institution, the Convent of Our Lady of Sorrows. The sisters had arrived from France in 1808, part of a wave of religious refugees fleeing Napoleon's persecution of the church. They established their order on 80 acres donated by the Devou family, wealthy sugar planters who saw spiritual prestige in hosting brides of Christ. The convent sat 2 miles from the river, connected to the main road by an oyster shell path that turned to mud during Louisiana's brutal summer rains. Its main building rose 3 stories, built of handmade brick with iron balconies imported from New Orleans. Behind it stood the chapel, a modest structure with stained glass windows depicting the 7 Sorrows of Mary. Farther back, barely visible from the road, stretched the work buildings, a laundry house, a kitchen garden, a small infirmary, and what locals called the penitent house, where the sisters supposedly housed women seeking refuge from sin. By 1842, the convent housed 23 women who wore the black habits of the order. Mother Superior Celeste Beaumont, 61 years old, had led the community for 18 years. She kept scrupulous records of everything. The cost of candles, the weight of vegetables harvested, the number of prayers said daily. Locals respected her severe devotion. She rarely smiled, never raised her voice, and attended to parish business with the precision of a military commander. The other nuns remained largely invisible to the outside world, appearing in town only for special masses or when delivering charity to the poor. The parish knew the sisters supported themselves through various enterprises. They ran a small school for the daughters of wealthy families, teaching French, needlework, and religious instruction. They sold vegetables and preserves. They took in laundry from plantation families. And according to discreet announcements in the New Orleans Catholic Register they occasionally facilitated Christian adoptions for families blessed with wealth but cursed with childlessness. Nobody questioned these arrangements. Louisiana's Catholic families trusted the church implicitly. If the sisters said a child needed a home, and if a family could afford the charitable donation of $200, the transaction seemed blessed by God Himself. The babies arrived healthy, baptized with certificates of birth signed by Mother Superior Beaumont, and witnessed by the parish priest, Father Antoine Dufresne. What nobody knew, what nobody could have imagined, was that behind the convent's charitable facade existed a system as calculated and cruel as any plantation slave economy. A system that turned faith into currency and transformed women's bodies into profit. The truth began with a woman named Ruth. Ruth arrived at the convent in April 1841. Though arrived suggests choice, and Ruth had none. She was 19 years old, the property of Charles Devou, grandson of the family that had donated the convent land. Charles owned 42 enslaved people across his 300-acre plantation. Ruth was one of them, born in the quarters, daughter of a field hand named Sarah, who died when Ruth was 12. Charles Devou had a problem that spring. His wife, Amelie, had noticed changes in Ruth's appearance that suggested the inevitable consequences of Charles's regular visits to the quarters. Amelie, raised in New Orleans society and educated by Ursuline nuns, knew how to read the signs of pregnancy and understood exactly what they meant about her husband's activities. But confronting Charles directly would have been unseemly. Instead, she found a solution that satisfied both propriety and revenge. She suggested Charles donate Ruth's services to the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy. "The convent always needs help," Amelie said sweetly over breakfast. "The donation would demonstrate our family's continued commitment to the church. Nobody would question a master lending a servant to support God's work. And Ruth would disappear from the plantation, from my daily humiliation, from your nocturnal accessibility." Charles agreed immediately, relieved to have the problem resolved without scandal. He delivered Ruth to the convent on a Tuesday morning in late April, when dogwoods were blooming and the air smelled of honeysuckle and river mud. Mother Superior Beaumont met them at the door, her face impassive as Charles explained that Ruth would serve the convent for as long as the sisters found her useful. "We accept this charitable gift," Mother Superior said, her French accent still thick after 33 years in Louisiana. "The girl will be put to good use in God's service." Ruth stood between them, silent as required, her hands clasped over the slight swell of her belly that would become obvious within weeks. She wore the rough cotton dress of a house servant, her hair wrapped in a faded yellow cloth. She didn't look at Charles or at the nun. She had learned years ago that invisibility was survival. Charles departed without another word to Ruth. She never saw him again. Mother Superior led Ruth through the main building, past parlors furnished with donated furniture from parish families, past the refectory where sisters ate in silence, past the chapel where candles burned before plaster saints. They walked across the courtyard, past the kitchen garden where 3 figures in black habits bent over bin plants, and approached a long, low building Ruth hadn't noticed from the road. "The penitent house," Mother Superior said, producing a key from the ring at her waist, "where women come to contemplate their sins and seek redemption through labor." The door opened onto a corridor lined with narrow doors on both sides. The air inside smelled of lye soap, sweat, and something else Ruth couldn't identify, something like the iron smell of blood. Mother Superior opened the third door on the left, revealing a small room perhaps 8 feet by 10. It contained a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a chamber pot, a small table, and a wooden cross on the wall. "You will sleep here," Mother Superior said. "You will rise at 4:30 when the bell rings. You will work in the fields until noon, rest for 1 hour, then work in the laundry until 6 o'clock. You will eat 2 meals daily. You will not speak to the other women unless necessary for work. You will pray for the salvation of your immortal soul. When your time comes, Sister Marie-Therese will attend you. After you have recovered, you will return to work. Your child will be given to a good Christian family who will raise it in the faith. This is God's mercy toward your sin." Ruth finally looked up at the Mother Superior's face. The nun's eyes were gray, cold as river water in January. "Do you understand?" Ruth nodded. "Say yes, Mother Superior." "Yes, Mother Superior. You will address all the sisters with proper respect. You will be obedient in all things. Disobedience will be corrected through prayer and fasting. Severe disobedience will be corrected through other means. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mother Superior." "Good. Sister Josephine will bring you work clothes. Remove that dress. It's unsuitable for field labor." Mother Superior departed, locking the door behind her. Ruth stood alone in the tiny room, listening to footsteps fade down the corridor. She placed one hand on her belly, feeling the small life that had sealed her fate, and wondered what kind of mercy had brought her to this place. She would learn the answer over the next 5 months. Ruth discovered she wasn't alone in the penitent house on her first morning when the bell rang at 4:30 in darkness so complete she couldn't see her own hands. She heard movement in other rooms. Footsteps, the sound of someone coughing, a child's brief cry quickly hushed. When Sister Josephine unlocked her door and handed her work clothes, a rough grey dress and a straw hat, Ruth counted at least 5 other doors being opened along the corridor. In the dim light of pre-dawn, she saw them. 6 other women, all between 15 and 25 years old, all in various stages of pregnancy. They moved silently, heads down, following Sister Josephine toward the fields behind the convent. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at each other directly. The cotton field stretched for 20 acres behind the penitent house, hidden from the main road by a line of live oaks. This was the convent's industrial enterprise, sanctioned by the parish as a way for the sisters to become self-sufficient. The cotton was sold to brokers in New Orleans, the proceeds funding the convent's operations. What the parish didn't know was who worked those fields every morning and evening, 6 days a week, 50 weeks a year. Ruth joined the line of women moving between the rows, picking bowls under the supervision of Sister Josephine, who walked the field's edge with a bell she rang if anyone slowed their pace. The work was familiar. Ruth had picked cotton since she was 6 years old on the Devou plantation, but pregnancy made it harder to bend, harder to breathe, harder to maintain the steady rhythm that prevented the overseers, or in this case, the sisters' attention. By the time the sun rose fully, sweat soaked Ruth's dress. Her back ached. The baby pressed against her bladder. She worked mechanically, hands moving through the motion she'd performed thousands of times, her mind elsewhere, remembering the plantation, her mother, the quarters where at least she'd had community, conversation, shared suffering. Here there was only silence and the rustle of cotton plants. At noon, Sister Josephine rang her bell. The women filed back to the penitent house, where tin bowls of beans and cornbread waited on a long table in what the sisters called the refectory, though it was really just an extension of the corridor with benches. Ruth ate quickly, ravenously. A younger woman, perhaps 16, sat across from her. Their eyes met briefly. The girl looked away. After the meal, the women moved to the laundry house, a separate building with enormous copper vats for boiling water and long tables for scrubbing. Here they washed linens for the sisters, tablecloths for the refectory, altar cloths for the chapel, and most profitably, laundry from plantation families who paid well for the convent services. The steam from the boiling water turned the air thick and suffocating. Ruth's hands blistered within the first hour, the lye soap burning into cuts she hadn't noticed from the cotton bowls. By 6 o'clock, when Sister Josephine finally dismissed them, Ruth could barely walk back to her room. She collapsed on the narrow bed, too exhausted to care about hunger or fear or the future. She slept immediately, dreamlessly, until the bell rang again at 4:30. This became her existence. Days blurred together, marked only by the increasing difficulty of work as her pregnancy advanced. She learned the other women's names through whispers in the laundry house, the only place Sister Josephine's vigilance occasionally lapsed. The youngest was Lydia, 15, who cried quietly every night. There was Hannah, 23, pregnant with her third child for the convent. There was Esther, Clara, Dinah, and Naomi. All were enslaved women sent to the convent by masters who wanted to hide evidence of their actions or by mistresses who wanted them removed from their husband's access. And there were others, Ruth discovered, women who had already delivered their babies and returned to work. Some had been at the convent for 5 years or more. Hannah told her in a hurried whisper while they scrubbed sheets that she'd birthed 3 children in the penitent house. Each had been taken within days of birth. She never knew where they went, never saw them again. The sisters call it God's mercy, Hannah whispered, providing Christian homes for children who would otherwise be born into sin. They pay $200, she added, glancing toward Sister Josephine's retreating back. I heard Mother Superior tell Father Dufresne. $200 for each baby to families who want children but can't have them. The money supports the convent's work. Ruth absorbed this information in silence. $200. On the Devou plantation, a strong field hand sold for $800. A skilled carpenter or blacksmith might bring $1,200. A baby, apparently, was worth $200. Not in sale, of course. That would be slavery, which the church officially opposed. This was adoption, facilitated by charitable sisters, requiring only a donation that happened to be the same amount every time. The mathematics of it clicked into place in Ruth's mind like puzzle pieces she didn't want to see. The convent housed, at any given time, 7 to 9 pregnant women. Each delivered a baby. Each baby was sold, though never called that. At $200 per child, with perhaps 10 to 12 babies per year, The convent generated $2,000 to $2,400 annually from this charitable work alone. More than enough to justify the cost of feeding the women, housing them, maintaining the penitent house. It was slavery, Ruth realized, but slavery refined to a particularly cruel efficiency. The masters profited by removing evidence of their sins. The church profited by selling the consequences, and the women themselves, already enslaved, became vessels for reproduction. Their bodies turned into factories for producing profit disguised as mercy. That night, Ruth lay awake in her narrow room, feeling her baby move inside her, and understood with crystalline clarity that she was trapped in a system that would take everything from her, including the child she'd never chosen to conceive but would nonetheless mourn when it disappeared into some wealthy family's nursery. She also understood that nobody would ever believe this was happening, even if she could tell them. Who would question the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy? Who would investigate a convent's charitable adoptions? Who would listen to the testimony of enslaved women who weren't even allowed to speak in public? The perfect crime, Ruth thought, is one disguised as virtue. Ruth's baby was born on a September morning in 1841, when humidity hung so thick in the air it felt like drowning. Sister Marie-Therese attended the birth, assisted by Hannah, who had birthed enough children to know the process. The labor lasted 14 hours. Ruth screamed until her voice gave out, then suffered in silence, grinding her teeth against pain that felt like her body was tearing itself apart from the inside. When the baby finally emerged, Sister Marie-Therese cleaned him efficiently, wrapped him in a white cloth, and held him up for Ruth to see. A boy, small but healthy. His eyes were closed, his fists clenched, his face red from the trauma of birth. "You may hold him briefly," Sister Marie-Therese said, her voice not unkind. "Then he must be baptized." Ruth took her son, feeling his weight in her arms, memorizing every detail of his face. His fingers were perfect, tiny crescents of fingernails, skin soft as rose petals. He made a small sound. Not quite a cry, more like a question. Ruth pressed her lips to his forehead, breathing in his smell, new and clean and already heartbreaking. 10 minutes, maybe 15. That's how long she held him. Then, Sister Marie-Therese took him away. And Ruth was alone in the birthing room, bleeding onto sheets that would be burned rather than laundered, her arms empty, her body hollow. She wasn't allowed to attend the baptism. Sister Marie-Therese told her later that Father Dufresne had performed the sacrament in the chapel with Mother Superior as witness. The baby had been named Thomas, a good Christian name. He would be leaving for his new family within the week, once Ruth's milk dried up and he could be fed properly. Ruth spent the next 3 days in bed recovering. Hannah brought her meals and changed her bandages. On the 4th day, Sister Josephine appeared at her door. "You will return to work tomorrow," the sister said. "The harvest doesn't wait for personal weakness." Ruth returned to the fields on legs that shook, her body aching in places she didn't know could hurt. She worked through pain, through grief, through a numbness that felt like being underwater. She never saw Thomas again. She didn't know which family took him. She didn't know if they were kind or cruel, if they would tell him he was adopted, if he would grow up wondering about the woman who gave him life. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. Over the next 3 months, 2 other women in the penitent house gave birth. Lydia delivered a girl who cried constantly for the brief days before she disappeared. Clara delivered twins, a boy and a girl, who were sold as a pair for $350. Ruth knew this because she overheard Mother Superior discussing the transaction with Father Dufresne in the courtyard, their voices carrying through the open window of the laundry house. The Robichaud family was particularly pleased to receive 2 children at once, Mother Superior said. They increased their donation by 50%. "Most generous. God's blessings multiply," Father Dufresne replied. "Your work here is truly miraculous, Mother Superior. These orphans find loving homes, and the convent's mission continues." Ruth's hands clenched around the sheet she was scrubbing. Orphans they called the babies. Orphans, as if their mothers were dead rather than enslaved 20 yards away, breaking their bodies in cotton fields to support the very system that stole their children. That evening, Ruth spoke to Hannah in the refectory, breaking the rule of silence while Sister Josephine was in the kitchen. "How long have you been here?" Hannah's eyes flicked nervously toward the door, then back to Ruth. 5 years. Since I was 18. Do you ever? Ruth stopped, unsure how to phrase the question. Do you ever think about leaving? Hannah's laugh was bitter and brief. Where would I go? I'm property of the Thibodeau family. They sent me here. If I run, they'll find me and it'll be worse. At least here I'm fed regularly and not, she trailed off, but Ruth understood. Not available to the master every night. But the children, Ruth pressed. Don't you want to know where they are? Of course I want to know, Hannah's voice cracked. I want to know if they're being treated well, if they're learning to read, if anyone tells them about me. But wanting doesn't change anything. This is how it is. This is how it'll always be. Ruth stared at her bowl of beans, cold now, congealing. Hannah was probably right. The system was too entrenched, too profitable, too protected by religious authority. But something in Ruth's mind refused to accept it. There had to be a way to expose this, to make someone listen, to stop the sisters from continuing this practice. The problem was that Ruth couldn't read or write. None of the women in the penitent house could. That was strategic, Ruth realized. Illiterate women couldn't document what was happening. They couldn't write letters or keep records. Their testimony, if anyone ever asked for it, would be dismissed as unreliable, the words of enslaved women who might lie for their own benefit. But there was someone who could write. Someone who already had suspicions. Someone who might, if approached correctly, have the courage to act. Marguerite. Marguerite Bellamy was 17 years old, daughter of Dr. John-Baptiste Bellamy, who served as physician to several prominent families in St. Augustine Parish. She attended the convent school where the sisters taught her French literature, religious history, and needlework. Unlike many wealthy girls, Marguerite had a sharp mind and an unfortunate habit of asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. She first noticed something wrong in January 1842 when she arrived early for her lesson and saw Sister Marie-Thérèse hurrying across the courtyard carrying a bundle wrapped in white cloth. The sister looked furtive, glancing around as if checking for witnesses. When she saw Marguerite, she stopped abruptly. "You're early, Miss Bellamy." "I apologize, sister. My father had an early call and dropped me off before 8. Sister Marie-Thérèse clutched the bundle tighter. Marguerite heard a small sound from within the cloth. A cry, quickly muffled. "Is that a baby?" Marguerite asked. "One of our charitable cases," Sister Marie-Thérèse said quickly. "We facilitate adoptions for unfortunate children. This one is going to a family in New Orleans today. The Lord provides Christian homes for all his children." "Where did the baby come from?" Sister Marie-Thérèse's expression hardened. "That is not appropriate for young ladies to discuss. The child's mother was a fallen woman who sought the church's mercy. Now she has it, and the child will have a better life. Go to the music room, Miss Bellamy. Sister Agnes will meet you there shortly." Marguerite went, but the encounter bothered her. Over the next months, she began paying attention to details she'd previously ignored. The women she occasionally glimpsed in the distance, working in the fields behind the convent, the closed door of the penitent house, which the sisters always deflected questions about, the frequency of charitable adoptions mentioned in parish announcements, sometimes 2 or 3 per month. In May, her father mentioned something that made the pieces start fitting together. They were at dinner, and Dr. Bellamy was discussing his patients with Marguerite's mother. "Charles Devaux asked me to examine one of his house servants today," he said, cutting his roast. Apparently, the girl had become pregnant, and they sent her to the convent for redemptive labor. He wanted to know if that kind of work was safe during pregnancy. I told him probably not, but I doubt he cared much about my medical opinion. Marguerite's mother frowned. "They send pregnant servants to the convent?" "Apparently, it's common practice. The masters don't want them visible on the plantation, and the convent needs workers. After the baby is born, the sisters arrange an adoption. Everyone benefits." Everyone benefits. Marguerite thought about that phrase for days afterward. Who benefited? Not the mothers. Certainly not the babies taken from their mothers within days of birth. Perhaps the adopting families, who got children without questions about their origins. Perhaps the convent, which gained workers and adoption fees. Perhaps the masters, who removed evidence of their own transgressions. She began watching more carefully during her twice-weekly lessons at the convent. She noted the locked door to the penitent house. She counted the women in the distant fields, always between 6 and 9 of them. She overheard conversations between sisters about deliveries and arrangements and donations. She saw babies being carried out of the convent in white bundles, always by Sister Marie-Therese, always discreetly. In July, she did something dangerous. She arrived at the convent 30 minutes early, told the sister at the door she needed to use the privy, and instead walked toward the penitent house. The door was locked as expected, but she could hear sounds from inside. Movement. A woman's voice humming something that sounded like a lullaby. A baby crying. Miss Bellamy. Mother Superior's voice behind her made Marguerite jump. You appear to be lost. I was looking for the privy, Mother Superior. The privy is in the opposite direction. This is the penitent house. It is not for visitors. Mother Superior's face was composed, but her eyes were ice. Marguerite felt a chill run through her despite the July heat. I apologize for my confusion. See that you don't become confused again. Now go to your lesson. Marguerite went, but she understood she'd been warned. Mother Superior knew she was asking questions, noticing things she wasn't supposed to notice. The next week, when Marguerite arrived for her lesson, Sister Agnes informed her that the school would be closed for August due to maintenance work. When September came, Marguerite received a polite letter from Mother Superior explaining that the school would no longer accept students over 16, as the sisters felt older girls should focus on preparing for marriage rather than continued education. Marguerite had been expelled, politely but firmly, for curiosity. She told her father, who dismissed her concerns. The sisters run a respectable institution, Marguerite. Whatever you think you saw, you misunderstood. It's not appropriate for young ladies to speculate about such matters. But Marguerite couldn't let it go. In November, she did something even more dangerous. She wrote a letter to the bishop in New Orleans describing what she'd observed and asking for an investigation. She signed it with her full name, sealed it carefully, and gave it to a family friend traveling to the city. 2 weeks later, her father was called to meet with Father Dufresne. He returned home furious. You wrote to the bishop, he demanded, making accusations against the Sisters of Perpetual Mercy. Do you have any idea the scandal you could have caused? Did the bishop investigate? The bishop spoke with Mother Superior, who explained that they facilitate charitable adoptions and house women seeking redemption. Everything is entirely proper. Father Dufresne was deeply offended that you would question the sisters' integrity. I've assured him it won't happen again. But Papa, if you would just look, her father's face was red. You will not discuss this again. You will not write any more letters. You will not embarrass this family further. Do you understand? Marguerite understood. She understood that challenging the church was impossible. She understood that enslaved women's suffering was invisible to people who didn't want to see it. She understood that the system protected itself perfectly. But she also understood, in the way privileged young women sometimes stumble upon truth through cracks in the comfortable world built around them, that something terrible was happening in the convent, and nobody with power cared enough to stop it. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in St. Augustine Parish intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. What Marguerite didn't know was that Ruth had been watching her during those months, noticing the girl's attention, her questions, her sudden expulsion from the school. And Ruth, who had been planning for weeks, decided to take a risk that could either save them all or destroy her. Ruth's second pregnancy became obvious in March 1843. The father was unknown to her, a detail that didn't matter in a system where pregnancy itself was the only relevant fact. She would deliver in October, another baby to be baptized and sold, another $200 for the convent's coffers, another piece of her soul torn away. But this time, Ruth had a plan. She'd been watching Sister Marie-Therese for 18 months now, studying the woman's patterns, her moments of weakness, the brief flashes of humanity that suggested conscience still lived beneath the habit. Sister Marie-Thérèse was not cruel like Sister Josephine, whose bell rang with vindictive precision whenever a woman slowed her pace in the fields. Marie-Thérèse was simply exhausted, a woman doing work she'd never imagined when she took her vows in France 30 years ago. She'd come to Louisiana expecting to teach children and tend the sick, not to midwife enslaved women and hand their babies to wealthy strangers. Ruth had seen the sister's hands shake after difficult births. She'd heard her praying in the corridor, words in French that Ruth couldn't understand but recognized as pleas for forgiveness. And most importantly, Ruth had noticed that Sister Marie-Thérèse kept detailed records of every birth, writing in a leather-bound book she carried in her apron pocket. If that book could be copied, if those records could reach someone who cared about justice, perhaps the convent system could be exposed. The problem was that Ruth couldn't read or write. None of the women in the penitent house could. That was strategic, Ruth had realized. Illiterate women couldn't document their own suffering. They couldn't write letters or keep evidence. Their words, if spoken, would be dismissed as unreliable testimony from enslaved women who might lie for personal gain. But Sister Marie-Thérèse could write, and Ruth had been carefully, methodically planting seeds of doubt in the sister's mind during every interaction over the past year. It began small questions during examinations, posed in the humble tone expected of enslaved women, but designed to make the sister think. "My baby will be happy with his new family, won't he, sister?" "Of course. We only place children with good Christian families. Do they love them? The families who take our babies?" Sister Marie-Thérèse's hands had paused just briefly on Ruth's swollen belly. "They want children desperately. That's why they come to us, because they can't have their own." "Yes. So, our babies fill an emptiness in their lives." "That's beautiful, sister. That must make you feel like you're doing God's work." The sister had looked at Ruth then, really looked at her, and Ruth had seen uncertainty in those tired eyes. "It is God's work," Marie-Thérèse said. But her voice lacked conviction. Over months, Ruth continued the careful erosion of the sister's certainty. She never accused, never challenged directly. Instead, she asked questions that forced Marie-Thérèse to confront the contradictions in the system she served. "Sister, do the families know about us? The mothers? They know the children come from unfortunate circumstances. Do they know we're enslaved? That we didn't choose to become pregnant? That we work in the fields while carrying their children? The circumstances of conception are not relevant to the children's futures. Aren't they, though? If I were one of those families, I think I'd want to know the truth. I'd want to know if the mother agreed to give up her baby, or if the baby was taken from her." Sister Marie-Thérèse had closed her medical bag with more force than necessary. "You ask too many questions, Ruth. It's dangerous to question God's plan." "I'm not questioning God, sister. I'm questioning whether this is truly His plan, or just what Mother Superior tells us is His plan." The sister had left quickly after that, but Ruth saw she'd struck something deep. Over the following weeks, Ruth noticed changes in Marie-Thérèse's behavior. The sister moved more slowly through her duties, as if weighed down by thoughts she couldn't escape. She spent more time in the chapel praying alone. And she began looking at the women in the penitent house differently, not as problems to be managed, but as human beings suffering under a system that used them. In May, Ruth took the greatest risk yet. During an examination, when they were alone in the small birthing room, Ruth spoke with unusual directness. "Sister, if someone wanted to write a letter, could you help them?" Marie-Thérèse's face went pale. "Who would you write to?" "Someone who might listen. Someone who already suspects what's happening here. There is no one who would listen to enslaved women. Your testimony has no legal standing. You should accept your circumstances and pray for strength. But my testimony combined with yours would have standing. You're a white woman, a nun, a witness to everything that happens here. If you testified to what you've seen, people would have to listen." Sister Marie-Thérèse stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "You speak dangerously. Mother Superior would punish such talk. I could punish you myself for suggesting I betray my order. Is it betrayal to tell the truth? Is it betrayal to stop injustice? It's not injustice if it's sanctioned by the church. Then why do you pray for forgiveness after every birth? Why do your hands shake when you take the babies away? Why do you look like you're carrying the weight of mortal sin? Marie-Thérèse's eyes filled with tears. Because I am, she whispered. Then she fled the room, leaving Ruth alone with the understanding that she'd pushed the sister to a breaking point. For 2 weeks, Sister Marie-Thérèse avoided Ruth entirely, sending Sister Josephine to conduct examinations. Ruth feared she'd gone too far, that the sister would report her to Mother Superior, that punishment would follow. But nothing happened. The convent continued its rhythms. Wake at 4:30, work the fields until noon, laundry until 6 o'clock, prayers, sleep, repeat. Then in June, on a morning when fog rolled thick across the cotton fields and Ruth could barely see the woman working beside her, Sister Marie-Thérèse appeared at the field's edge. She walked directly to Ruth, ignoring Sister Josephine's questioning look. "Come with me. You're needed in the infirmary." Ruth followed, her heart pounding. Had someone discovered their conversations? Was this a pretext for punishment? But Marie-Thérèse led her not to the infirmary, but to a small storage room behind the laundry house, a space filled with cleaning supplies and spare linens. The sister closed the door and spoke in a rushed whisper. "If I help you, if I write what you tell me to write, you must never speak my name. If Mother Superior discovers I've betrayed the order, I'll be excommunicated. I'll lose everything. Do you understand?" Ruth's breath caught. "I understand. I've been praying for guidance. I've asked God to show me the right path. And every time I pray, I see the faces of the babies I've delivered. 83 children in my 14 years here. I remember every one of them. I remember their mothers' faces when I took them away. And I can't pretend anymore that this is mercy. It's cruelty dressed in religious vestments. It's profit disguised as charity. And I've been complicit in it for too long. Then help me stop it." Sister Marie-Thérèse pulled a small notebook from her apron, the kind used for household accounts. "I can't write much, a few pages at most. If Mother Superior notices missing paper from her office, she'll investigate. But I can write your testimony, and the testimonies of other women if they'll speak. I can copy portions of the financial ledgers showing the systematic income from adoptions. And I can document the names of masters who've sent women here, along with the names of families who've received babies." "Will that be enough?" "It's more than we had yesterday," Ruth said. "It's evidence. It's truth. That's all we can offer." Over the next 3 weeks, during stolen moments between duties, Sister Marie-Thérèse collected testimonies. She spoke with Hannah, who described delivering 3 children and never seeing any of them again. She spoke with Esther, who'd been at the convent for 4 years. She spoke with Clara, whose twins had been sold as a pair for $350. Each woman's story added weight to the evidence, confirming that this wasn't isolated incidents, but systematic exploitation. Ruth dictated her own testimony during a late-night visit to the storage room, speaking by candlelight while Marie-Thérèse's hand moved across paper, capturing every detail. Ruth described her arrival at the convent, the conditions in the penitent house, the fieldwork during pregnancy, the moment her first son was taken from her arms. She named Charles Devaux as the father of her children and described how his wife had arranged her removal to the convent to hide evidence of her husband's actions. "Write this, sister. We are enslaved twice here. Once by the masters who own our bodies, and again by the church that steals our children. The sisters call it mercy, but mercy doesn't come with a price tag of $200. This isn't adoption. It's trafficking. The convent profits from our pregnancies while claiming to serve God. Sister Marie-Thérèse wrote it all, her hand steady despite visible fear. When she finished, she had 5 pages of testimony, each one signed with an X where the women couldn't write their names. She also had 3 pages copied from Mother Superior's financial ledgers, showing systematic income recorded as charitable donations, but noted with a precision that suggested business transactions rather than gifts. On a July evening when thunderstorms rolled across the parish and lightning illuminated the convent in brief, stark flashes, Sister Marie-Thérèse completed her final task. She wrote her own affidavit describing everything she'd witnessed in 14 years. The number of births, the systematic sale of infants, the exploitation of enslaved women, the complicity of Mother Superior and Father Dufresne. She signed her name at the bottom *Marie-Thérèse Dumont*, and dated it July 14, 1843. "Now we need to get this to someone who can act on it," she said to Ruth during their final meeting in the storage room. "Someone with legal standing and the courage to challenge the church." "The girl," Ruth said. "Marguerite Bellamy. She tried once to expose the convent. She wrote to the bishop. She asked questions that got her expelled from the school. If we give her this evidence, she might try again. She's just a girl, 17 years old. What can she do against the church? More than we can do alone." And according to Hannah, the girl's brother recently returned from studying law in New Orleans. "Maybe he'll help her." Sister Marie-Thérèse folded the pages carefully, tucking them into a waterproof pouch she'd taken from the medical supplies. "I'll deliver these to her tomorrow when I go to town for supplies. I'll claim I need to visit Dr. Bellamy for treatment. The girl is often at her father's clinic. I'll find a way to give her the documents. Thank you, sister. You're risking everything for us." Marie-Thérèse's face was drawn with fear and determination. "I'm risking everything to stop being complicit in evil. There's a difference. Pray that this works, Ruth. Pray that someone finally listens." The next day, Sister Marie-Thérèse made her journey to town. Marguerite Bellamy was arranging medical supplies in her father's clinic when Sister Marie-Thérèse arrived, claiming she needed treatment for a persistent cough that made breathing difficult. Dr. Bellamy examined her thoroughly, listened to her chest, and found her lungs completely clear. "There's nothing wrong with you, sister," he said, puzzled. "Your breathing is normal. Perhaps you're experiencing anxiety rather than a physical ailment." "Perhaps," Sister Marie-Thérèse agreed. "Might I rest for a moment before returning to the convent? The heat has made me lightheaded." Dr. Bellamy, always solicitous of the religious, offered her water and suggested she sit in the waiting room while he attended to another patient. He left Sister Marie-Thérèse alone with Marguerite, who was organizing bandages with the focused attention of someone trying to look busy while listening to every word. The moment Dr. Bellamy's footsteps faded, Sister Marie-Thérèse moved quickly. She approached Marguerite, pulled the waterproof pouch from beneath her habit, and pressed it into the girl's hands. "Read these tonight," she whispered urgently. "Everything you suspected is true. Everything is documented here. But be warned, if you act on this information, you'll face opposition from forces more powerful than you can imagine. The church protects its own. Wealthy families protect their reputations, and the law protects property rights over human dignity. Even with evidence, justice is not guaranteed." Before Marguerite could respond, Sister Marie-Thérèse swept out of the clinic, leaving the girl holding a pouch that would either change everything or destroy her family's standing in the parish. That evening, Marguerite waited until the household slept before lighting a candle in her bedroom and opening the pouch. She read Ruth's testimony first, the words hitting her like physical blows, then Hannah's account, then Esther's, then Clara's. 5 different women, 5 variations of the same horror: systematic exploitation, stolen children, profit disguised as mercy. The financial records confirmed everything with brutal precision. Column after column of charitable donations, each exactly $200 except for the twin delivery noted at $350. The entries went back to 1835, 8 years before Marguerite was born. 83 documented transactions over that period. $16,600 in total revenue from selling babies. Sister Marie-Thérèse's affidavit was the final piece. A religious woman's confession of complicity and determination to expose the truth. Her signature at the bottom made it legally significant. Her testimony would carry weight that enslaved women's words never could in Louisiana courts. Marguerite's hands shook as she read. This was worse than her darkest suspicions. She'd imagined questionable adoption practices, perhaps some financial irregularities. But this was an entire system, carefully constructed, operating for years with the blessing of church authorities and the silent cooperation of parish families who asked no questions about where the babies came from. She needed help. Not from her father, who'd dismissed her concerns before. Not from Father Dufresne, who was clearly complicit. She needed someone who understood law, who had connections outside the parish, who might have the courage to challenge institutions that others considered untouchable. She went to her brother's room and knocked softly. Etienne, 24 years old and recently admitted to the Louisiana bar, opened the door, looking annoyed at being woken at midnight. His annoyance vanished when he saw his sister's face. "Read this," Marguerite said, handing him the documents. "Read all of it, then tell me what we can do." Etienne took the papers to his desk, lit 2 more candles, and began reading. Marguerite watched his expression change from skepticism to shock to cold fury. When he finished, he sat in silence for several minutes, processing the implications. "If this is accurate," he said finally, "the church is operating a human trafficking scheme disguised as charitable adoption. But proving it in court will be extremely difficult." "Why?" "The evidence is right there. The evidence shows that enslaved women were housed at the convent, gave birth, and their children were adopted. The church will argue this is legal and moral. They're providing homes for children who would otherwise grow up enslaved. The adopting families will claim they pay donations, not purchase prices. And the women themselves, being enslaved, have limited legal standing to testify against their masters or the church. So there's nothing we can do." Marguerite's voice rose with frustration. "I didn't say that." Etienne picked up Sister Marie-Thérèse's affidavit. "This changes everything. She's a white woman, a nun with 14 years of first-hand observation. Her testimony can't be dismissed as easily as enslaved women's words. If we can combine her affidavit with these financial records, we might be able to force an investigation." "But who would investigate? Father Dufresne is complicit. The bishop already dismissed my concerns. We need someone outside the local church hierarchy, someone with legal standing to challenge the diocese. And I think I know who might help us." Etienne stood, pacing his room with growing energy. "There's a lawyer in New Orleans named Jacques Devos. He's from the same family that donated the convent's land, but he's what they call the black sheep. His published articles arguing that Catholic teaching is incompatible with slavery. He's made enemies in the church hierarchy and among plantation owners, but he has significant connections in the city and a reputation for taking cases others won't touch. Will he believe us? With this evidence, he'll have to take it seriously. But we need more than what we have here. We need the actual ledgers from Mother Superior's office, not just copied pages. We need correspondence between the convent and adopting families showing negotiation of prices. We need documentation of which masters sent which women to the convent. The more evidence we have, the harder it will be for the church to dismiss this as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. How do we get more evidence without alerting Mother Superior? Etienne thought carefully, his legal mind working through possibilities. Sister Marie-Thérèse has access to the Mother Superior's office. If she's willing to take one more risk, she could photograph. He stopped, remembering the technology didn't exist yet in practical form. She could make more copies, detailed copies of complete ledger pages, multiple letters showing the pattern of transactions. It would take time and enormous risk, but it's our best option. Over the next week, Marguerite made contact with Sister Marie-Thérèse through carefully coded notes delivered via her father's medical supply orders to the convent. The messages were hidden inside packages of bandages, written on thin paper that could be easily destroyed. Marguerite wrote, "We have a lawyer who will help. Need complete financial records, correspondence with families, master list. Can you access?" Sister Marie-Thérèse's response came 3 days later. Will try. Mother Superior keeps everything locked. May take weeks. Pray for me. For the next month, Sister Marie-Thérèse lived in constant terror of discovery. She copied documents late at night when other sisters were sleeping and Mother Superior was in her quarters. She worked by minimal candlelight, her hand cramping from the effort of transcribing page after page of ledgers that documented the convent's profitable enterprise. She took only 2 or 3 pages per night, carefully returning everything to its exact position so Mother Superior wouldn't notice the intrusion. The financial ledgers revealed even more than the initial copies had shown. Not only were there systematic entries for baby adoptions, but there were also detailed notes about each child, physical descriptions, temperament, any distinguishing features. The babies were being catalogued like merchandise. Some entries even noted which families had expressed interest in specific characteristics. Robichaud family prefers light-skinned infants. Feared family requested girl, any coloring acceptable. The correspondence was equally damning. Letters from prospective adoptive families negotiated terms like business contracts. We are prepared to offer a donation of $200 for a healthy male infant. We require baptismal certificate and assurance of good Christian lineage. Another letter specified, we understand the children come from unfortunate circumstances. We trust the convent's discretion in not revealing details that might distress our family. Sister Marie-Therese also found the master list, a complete record of every enslaved woman who'd been housed in the penitent house since 1835. 42 women total. Some had delivered multiple children. Some had died at the convent, their deaths recorded with clinical detachment. Died in childbirth infection. Died, fever, 3 weeks postpartum. These deaths were never reported to civil authorities, never investigated, simply noted and forgotten. By late August, Sister Marie-Therese had compiled a devastating collection of evidence. She'd copied 70 pages of financial ledgers, 12 letters between the convent and adopting families, the complete master list with dates of arrival and departure for each woman, and her own detailed account of births she'd personally attended. She documented everything that could prove systematic operation rather than isolated charitable acts. She delivered the final package to Marguerite on August 22, using the excuse of purchasing medical supplies from Dr. Bellamy's clinic. Her hands shook as she handed over the thick bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "This is everything," she whispered to Marguerite in the brief moment they were alone. "If Mother Superior discovers what I've done, I'll be excommunicated. I've betrayed my order, my vows, everything I've sworn to uphold. But I can't serve God by serving evil. I can't claim to follow Christ while participating in the systematic theft of children from their mothers. Whatever happens now, at least I've told the truth." "You've done more than that," Marguerite said, gripping the sister's hands. "You've given us the weapons to fight back. You've given those women a voice when everyone else silenced them. That's not betrayal. That's courage." Sister Marie-Therese's eyes filled with tears. "Then I pray it's enough. I pray someone finally listens." The next day, Etienne departed for New Orleans with the complete package of evidence. He rode for 2 days, arriving in the city on August 24. He went directly to Jacques Devos's office, a modest building near the French Quarter that served as headquarters for the lawyers' crusade against slavery's worst abuses. Jacques Devos was 46 years old, his hair graying early from stress and late nights spent writing legal briefs that challenged Louisiana's entire social order. He'd been disowned by his wealthy family for his abolitionist views, but had built a respected practice defending enslaved people in freedom suits and prosecuting whites who committed egregious violence against blacks. He was known for taking cases others wouldn't touch and for his refusal to be intimidated by powerful opponents. When Etienne Bellamy appeared in his office with a package containing 70 pages of evidence against a Catholic convent, Devos's first instinct was skepticism. The church was too powerful, too entrenched in Louisiana society. Accusations against religious orders rarely went anywhere, and young lawyers who pursued them often found their careers destroyed. But as he read through the documents, Devos's skepticism transformed into barely controlled rage. He read every page methodically, making notes, cross-referencing names, calculating financial totals. When he finished, he looked at Etienne with new respect. "This is the most comprehensive documentation of systematic exploitation I've seen in 20 years of practice," he said. "If even half of this is accurate, the Convent of Our Lady of Sorrows has been operating a human trafficking enterprise under the guise of charitable adoption. They've generated over $16,000 through the sale of enslaved children. They've worked pregnant women in cotton fields. And they've done it all with the explicit knowledge and participation of church authorities." "Can you prosecute?" Etienne asked. "Prosecute? No. These women are enslaved property. Under Louisiana law, their children are also property. The masters who sent them to the convent were within their legal rights. The adopting families paid donations, not purchase prices, which technically makes the transactions legal. And the Church has extensive legal protections that shield religious orders from civil prosecution. Then what can we do? DeVos leaned back in his chair, his mind already working through strategies. We can force an investigation that exposes the truth. We can file formal complaints with the Church's Louisiana diocese and with civil authorities. We can generate enough public scandal that the Church has to act to protect its reputation. We won't get criminal charges, but we might be able to shut down the convent's operation and prevent future exploitation. And sometimes, when justice isn't possible through law, exposure is the next best option. Over the next week, Jacques DeVos prepared the most comprehensive legal complaint of his career. He documented every transaction, every letter, every testimony. He prepared affidavits from Sister Marie-Therese and from Marguerite Bellamy describing how they'd obtained the evidence. He wrote a detailed analysis of how the convent's operations violated both church law regarding the sanctity of motherhood and civil statutes against human trafficking. On September 1, 1843, he filed simultaneous complaints with the Bishop of New Orleans, the civil court system, and the Louisiana Territorial Governor's Office. He also strategically sent copies of key documents to 3 newspapers, the New Orleans Daily Picayune *, the Baton Rouge Gazette *, and the Louisiana Courier Star. If the Church tried to bury the investigation, the press would ensure the scandal remained public. The response was immediate and explosive. The bishop, horrified by the detailed evidence and terrified of public scandal, dispatched investigators to the convent within 48 hours. Civil authorities, pressured by DeVos's connections and the shocking nature of the allegations, obtained a warrant to search the convent's premises and seize all financial records. Newspaper editors, sensing a story that would sell thousands of copies, sent reporters to St. Augustine Parish to interview anyone who knew anything about the convent's operations. On September 7, 1843, constables and church investigators arrived at the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows with legal authority to search every building, interview every resident, and seize any documents related to the adoption operations. Mother Superior Beaumont, faced with overwhelming evidence and legal compulsion, had no choice but to comply. The investigators opened the locked doors of the penitent house and found 9 women in various stages of pregnancy, living in conditions that shocked even hardened officials accustomed to the realities of slavery. The rooms were cramped, poorly ventilated, furnished with only the barest necessities. The women themselves showed signs of malnutrition and exhaustion. 3 newborn infants were discovered in a separate nursery room, being cared for by an elderly enslaved woman while awaiting placement with adoptive families. The investigators seized Mother Superior's ledgers, her correspondence, and every document in her locked cabinets. They interviewed the women, though their legal testimony was limited by their enslaved status. They questioned the sisters, most of whom claimed ignorance of the financial arrangements and insisted they were simply following Mother Superior's orders. Sister Marie-Therese was interviewed separately. She confessed everything. Her role in copying the documents, her growing disgust with the convent's operations, her decision to help expose the truth. The church investigators were torn between admiration for her conscience and fury at her betrayal of the order. In the end, they placed her under temporary house arrest while they decided her fate. The scandal exploded across Louisiana and beyond. The Daily Picayune ran front-page stories for 2 weeks straight with headlines that grew increasingly sensational. Convent accused of selling babies. Church officials profited from enslaved mothers. Systematic exploitation disguised as charity. The stories spread to newspapers in Charleston, Atlanta, Richmond, and even northern cities like Boston and Philadelphia, where abolitionists seized on the scandal as evidence of slavery's corrupting influence on all institutions, including religious ones. The legal and ecclesiastical proceedings that followed were complicated, protracted, and ultimately limited by the same system that had enabled the exploitation in the first place. The reality was that under Louisiana law, enslaved women and their children were property. The masters who'd sent women to the convent had acted within their legal rights. The adopting families had paid donations rather than purchase prices, which made the transactions technically legal, even if morally reprehensible. Mother Superior Celeste Beaumont was removed from her position and sent to a cloistered monastery in France, where she would spend the remainder of her life in prayer and penance. She never publicly acknowledged wrongdoing, maintaining until her death in 1851 that she had served God's will by providing Christian homes for children who would otherwise have grown up in bondage. Father Antoine Dufresne, whose signatures appeared on every baptismal certificate and who had blessed every adoption, was reassigned to a remote parish in northern Louisiana near the Arkansas border. He served there until his death in 1856, never again rising to positions of authority within the church hierarchy. The other sisters at the convent were dispersed to different institutions across the diocese. Most claimed they had known nothing about the financial arrangements and had simply followed orders. Whether this was true or convenient fiction would never be determined. Sister Marie-Thérèse Dumont faced the harshest personal consequences despite being the whistleblower who'd exposed the scandal. The church authorities deliberated for months about her fate. She had broken her vows of obedience by stealing documents and sharing them with outsiders. She had caused enormous scandal and embarrassment to the church. But she had also acted according to her conscience and exposed genuine wrongdoing. In December 1843, the bishop reached a decision. Sister Marie-Thérèse would be released from her vows, but not excommunicated. She would be allowed to leave religious life with her soul intact, but would never be permitted to serve in any Catholic institution again. She was essentially exiled from the only life she'd known for 33 years. She left Louisiana in January 1844, traveling to Philadelphia, where she found work as a midwife serving poor families in the city's immigrant neighborhoods. She never married, never returned to religious life, but spent the rest of her days delivering babies and ensuring mothers kept their children. She died in 1867 at age 63. Her grave is marked with a simple stone that reads, ** She served conscience above comfort. ** Jacques Devos fought for 2 years to achieve some measure of justice for the women and children affected by the convent's operations. He filed numerous legal motions, appealed to church authorities, and lobbied Louisiana legislators to create new laws protecting enslaved women from similar exploitation. His efforts achieved 3 small but significant victories. First, in March 1845, the Church issued a formal directive prohibiting any Catholic institution in Louisiana from housing enslaved women for purposes of labor or childbirth. The directive carefully avoided acknowledging systematic wrongdoing, but made it impossible for the convent model to be replicated elsewhere. Second, civil authorities created new requirements for adoption processes, mandating that birth mothers sign consent forms and that adoptions be registered with local courts rather than handled privately through religious institutions. These requirements had limited effect on enslaved women, who legally couldn't give consent, but they created a paper trail that made covert operations more difficult. Third, and most importantly, Devos secured the release of detailed records showing which children had been adopted by which families. This information was placed in sealed files with the Louisiana territorial government, to be opened only by the children themselves once they reached adulthood. It was imperfect justice, the children had already been separated from their mothers, but it gave them the possibility of someday learning their true origins. The convent itself closed temporarily in September 1843 and remained empty for 3 years while the church decided its fate. In 1847, it reopened under completely new management, with strict oversight from the diocese and a focus exclusively on education for the daughters of wealthy families. It operated in this capacity until 1923, when declining enrollment and rising costs forced its permanent closure. The women who'd been held in the penitent house were returned to their masters in the weeks following the investigation. For them, exposure of the scandal changed little. Ruth went back to the Devou plantation and continued working in the fields and the house until the end of slavery in 1865. She delivered one more child in 1845, a daughter she was allowed to keep because by then Charles Devou's wife had died and he'd lost interest in hiding evidence of his affairs. Hannah died in childbirth in 1848, delivering her 5th child. The baby died with her. They were buried together in the plantation's slave cemetery, their graves marked with wooden crosses that rotted away within a decade. Lydia, the youngest of the women Ruth had known in the penitent house, never recovered from the trauma of losing her child. She became increasingly withdrawn, refusing to work, barely eating. In 1850, her master sold her to a plantation in Mississippi. Her fate after that was unrecorded. Clara, Esther, Dinah, Naomi, the other women whose names appeared in Sister Marita Rees' testimony, returned to their various plantations and disappeared into the vast, largely undocumented lives of enslaved people in the antebellum South. Some may have survived to see freedom in 1865. Some almost certainly didn't. The children sold through the convent system grew up scattered across Louisiana and beyond, some in New Orleans, some on plantations, some in small towns throughout the South. Most were never told they were adopted. Those who eventually learned the truth faced the devastating reality that their birth records contained only minimal information: a date, a location, a price paid. Their mothers' names were often listed simply as unknown or recorded only by first name with no surname, making reunion nearly impossible. But there were exceptions. In the 1870s and 1880s, as some of the adopted children reached adulthood and began searching for their origins, a few managed to trace their way back to the convent records that Jacques DeVos had secured. These records, stored in Louisiana's territorial archives, contained the master list that Sister Marita Rees had copied: names of enslaved women, names of their masters, dates of birth for each child. Ruth was among the few mothers who was found by her child. In 1872, when she was 50 years old and living in New Orleans as a free woman working as a seamstress, a young man named Thomas Robichaud appeared at her door. He was 30 years old, light-skinned, well-dressed, educated. He'd grown up in a wealthy New Orleans family who told him he was adopted but provided no details about his origins until his adoptive father's death revealed papers from the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows. Thomas had spent 2 years tracing his birth through the archived records, searching for any woman named Ruth who'd been at the convent in 1841. He'd found 3 possibilities. Ruth was the second he'd located, and the moment he saw her face, he knew. They had the same eyes, the same shape of mouth, the same slight gap between their front teeth. They sat together in Ruth's small room near the docks, and she told him everything. About the DeVos plantation, about his father Charles, about being sent to the convent, about the 10 minutes she'd held him after his birth before he was taken away, about spending 31 years wondering what had become of him, whether he was alive, whether he was treated well, whether he ever thought about the woman who'd given him life. Thomas listened with tears streaming down his face. He told her about his childhood with the Robichaud family, who had been kind but distant, about his education, his work as a clerk in a shipping firm, his marriage the previous year, about always feeling incomplete, always knowing something essential was missing from his understanding of himself. "I'm sorry," Ruth said at one point. "I'm sorry you were raised by strangers. I'm sorry I couldn't keep you. I'm sorry for all of it." "You have nothing to apologize for," Thomas said fiercely. "You were enslaved. You had no choice. They stole me from you. That's not your fault." From that day forward, Thomas visited Ruth regularly, usually on Sunday afternoons when his work schedule allowed. He brought her money when she needed it, food when she was ill, company when she was lonely. He introduced her to his wife, who was kind and welcoming despite the unusual circumstances. When Thomas's first child was born in 1874, he named her Ruth after the grandmother she would grow up knowing. For Ruth, these visits were both joy and pain. Joy because she'd found her son, because he was alive and well and had become a good man. Pain because she couldn't help thinking about her other children, the daughter born in 1843 that she'd never even held, never named, never knew what became of. Thomas tried to help her search the records for that daughter, but they found nothing. Either the records were incomplete, or the adoption had been handled entirely off the books, or the child had died young. Ruth would never know. She died in 1884 at age 62, her body worn out from decades of hard labor. Thomas arranged for her burial in a Catholic cemetery in New Orleans with a proper headstone that read, *Ruth. Beloved mother. Born into bondage, died in freedom. Her truth set others free. He visited her grave monthly until his own death in 1921, always bringing fresh flowers and always telling his children and grandchildren the story of their grandmother, who'd had the courage to speak truth when silence would have been safer. Marguerite Bellamy married in 1846 at age 21 to a lawyer from Baton Rouge, who shared her sense of justice and her willingness to challenge authority. She never forgot the role she'd played in exposing the convent's operations, and she spent much of her adult life involved in charitable work focused on improving conditions for enslaved people and, after 1865, for newly freed blacks trying to build lives in the chaotic post-war South. She kept all the documents related to the convent scandal in a locked box, which she donated to Louisiana State University before her death in 1903, specifying that they should be made available to researchers interested in the true history of slavery and the Church's complicated role in that system. Etienne Bellamy built a successful legal career, eventually becoming a judge in Louisiana's territorial court system. He continued working with Jacques DeVos on cases related to enslaved people's rights until DeVos's death in 1859. After the Civil War, Etienne was instrumental in helping establish legal protections for freed people and in prosecuting cases of violence and exploitation during Reconstruction. The convent of Our Lady of Sorrows building stood for 80 years after the scandal, serving as a school, then standing empty for periods, then reopening under new management. In 1956, a fire of unknown origin destroyed the East Wing, including the former penitent house where Ruth and the other women had been held. Local newspapers reported the fire as a minor incident, historic building damaged, no injuries. Nobody investigated the cause. By then, everyone who remembered the scandal directly was dead, and the story had faded into footnotes in parish history. But the evidence survived. Sister Marie-Therese affidavit, Ruth's testimony, the copied ledgers, the correspondence, all of it was preserved in archives at Louisiana State University and in the Church's own records in New Orleans. Researchers who knew where to look could find them, could piece together the story of how a religious institution transformed exploitation into profit and disguised cruelty as mercy. The final accounting of the convent's operations showed that between 1835 and 1843, 87 documented children were sold through the adoption system. At $200 each, that generated $17,400 in direct revenue. The additional income from cotton harvesting and laundry services performed by enslaved women probably added another $15,000 to $20,000 over that period. In total, the convent likely generated between $32,000 and $37,000 in profit from the systematic exploitation of enslaved women, equivalent to perhaps $1 million in later currency. But these financial calculations miss the true cost. 42 women passed through the penitent house during those 8 years. Some delivered 1 child, some delivered 4 or 5. Hannah delivered 5 children and never saw any of them again before dying in childbirth. Ruth delivered 3 children and found only one 3 decades later. The others vanished into the vast machinery of slavery and adoption, their connections severed, their histories erased. The children themselves grew up not knowing they were part of a systematic operation that turned enslaved women's pregnancies into profit. They were raised as the legitimate children of wealthy families, given education and opportunities their birth mothers could never have provided. Some probably lived good lives, never knowing the circumstances of their origins. Some eventually learned they were adopted and spent years searching for answers that often didn't exist. And the masters who impregnated enslaved women and then sent them to the convent to hide the evidence. They faced no consequences. Under Louisiana law, they'd done nothing illegal. Their actions were protected by a system that treated enslaved people as property, without rights, without agency, without legal recourse against abuse. The scandal of the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows revealed the fundamental truth that when human beings are treated as property, when institutions prioritize profit over dignity, when power structures protect themselves rather than the vulnerable, evil flourishes under the guise of virtue. The sisters believed, perhaps genuinely, that they were doing God's work by providing homes for children. But belief doesn't transform exploitation into mercy. Good intentions don't absolve moral responsibility. And religious authority doesn't sanctify systematic cruelty. The story asks uncomfortable questions that have no easy answers. How many other institutions operated similar systems that were never exposed? How many children were separated from their mothers under the guise of charity or adoption? How many women's voices were silenced because their legal status as property meant their testimony didn't matter? How many crimes were committed with religious blessing because those in power convinced themselves that profit and faith could coexist without contradiction? These questions remained relevant long after the convent closed, long after slavery ended, long after the specific circumstances of Ruth's story faded into history. They remained relevant because the fundamental dynamics, power protecting itself, institutions prioritizing reputation over justice, vulnerable people exploited by systems that claim to serve them, continued in different forms across different eras. Ruth's courage in speaking truth despite having no legal standing to do so. Sister Marie-Thérèse's choice to violate her vows in service of conscience. Marguerite's determination to challenge authority despite social pressure to remain silent. These acts of resistance against systematic injustice represent something essential about human dignity. They demonstrate that even within systems designed to silence certain voices, those voices can still speak. Even when justice seems impossible, exposure remains possible. Even when the law protects cruelty, conscience can demand change. The documents they created, the testimony they preserved, became evidence not just of specific crimes, but of broader truths about how systems of oppression function. They showed how exploitation can be disguised as charity, how profit can be justified through religious language, how institutions can commit systematic abuses while maintaining public reputations for virtue. These lessons remained relevant long after the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows disappeared from Louisiana's landscape. In the end, the scandal changed little structurally but revealed much about human nature and institutional power. The convent closed. The specific operation ended. But slavery continued for another 22 years. Exploitation of vulnerable people continued in different forms. And the tension between conscience and complicity, between speaking truth and protecting comfort, continued to define how individuals respond when they discover they're part of systems that cause harm. Ruth lived long enough to see slavery end, to be reunited with one of her children, to die as a free woman rather than someone's property. In her final years, when Thomas visited with his children, she would sometimes tell them stories about the convent, about the women she'd known there, about the courage it took to speak truth when silence would have been safer. She wanted them to understand that resistance was possible even in impossible circumstances, that dignity could survive even systematic attempts to destroy it. Remember, she told Thomas's eldest daughter shortly before her death, that every system that treats people as property, every institution that puts profit before human dignity, depends on silence. It depends on people not asking questions, not challenging authority, not speaking uncomfortable truths. The moment someone breaks that silence, the moment someone documents the reality behind the facade, the system becomes visible. And once it's visible, it can be challenged. That's what we did. We made the invisible visible. We made the silent spoken. And even though justice was incomplete, even though consequences were limited, we told the truth. That matters. It always matters. She died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep, with Thomas holding her hand. On her gravestone, he ensured that her truth was preserved in stone, a permanent record that she had existed, had suffered, had resisted, and had ultimately survived long enough to see her story acknowledged rather than buried. The story of the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows serves as a reminder that history contains countless such stories of exploitation disguised as mercy, of cruelty justified through religious language, of vulnerable people systematically abused by institutions that claimed to serve them. Some were exposed and documented. Many more were not. But each one represents human beings who suffered, who resisted when they could, and who deserve to be remembered not as nameless victims, but as individuals who faced impossible circumstances with whatever courage they could muster. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? The Church never released all its documents about the convent, and many questions remain unanswered. How many other convents operated similar systems? How many children were sold under the guise of charity? How many women's stories were lost because nobody bothered to document them, or because the documents were destroyed before they could be preserved? Leave your comment below with your thoughts. If you found this story compelling and want to hear more histories that challenge comfortable narratives, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates dark historical truths. See you in the next one.